Welcome back, everyone. I have a special guest today to talk about some real interesting uh, effects of doing infrared on gout. And his name is Dr. Ben Pearl. He's a podiatrist, and he's been in the field for quite some time. So welcome to the interview, Doc.
Oh, thank you for having me. I've been following you for a while, and I really like the varied approaches that you take, to give people some armamentarium that they can do right from the home in their local drugstore or health food store.
That's great because you do the same thing. I think you kind of think outside the box. I've watched some of your videos, so that's why I wanted to interview and just kind of pick your brain. Today, I want to kind of focus on this gout. A lot of people have gout, and they don't like to take the medication because it could potentially create some wild side effects. So I know you have various therapies in your clinic. If we could just focus in on this red light therapy, and there's different types of red light that we'll talk about on gout. And so thanks for being on, and I won't take too much of your time, but a couple questions to get right off the bat. So it's a little confusing for people when they talk about red light because you have different spectrums or different wavelengths. You have the far and the near infrared. Can you just simply explain, like, is there much significance with therapy, or does these different types of frequencies create different effects?
Right. So I think when we're talking about what most people talk about in terms of infrared and LEDs, these are very safe units that have nice musculoskeletal benefits, nice clearing out of joint synovitis and tendonitis, and we're talking specifically about gout. Can even do things that help cell permeability, which, as you know, is the exchange of ions, and uric acid is essentially something that the body is overproducing. So it can help with that whole process of cellular exchange and the cell getting rid of the waste byproducts. As far as the spectrums which you mentioned, the lower levels aren't as strong, so they're going to require more time, more dosage time to apply them. But there's nothing wrong with
you talk about the frequencies closer to visible light, like I guess it's the near or the far, or not? Yeah, it's the near, right? Near infrared.
Right.
Got it.
Right. As we get into things like laser at different amplitudes, then we have accompanying heat, and then those obviously are more clinic-based situations. Although there are, as you know, and on the market now, home laser units that are the FDA has approved for home use distribution. And the best way to do that is really to go online and do your due diligence to make sure that they're legitimate devices. But those are getting into a different spectrum of light, and they have their own effects. And what some people do is they'll do combinations of therapy where they'll do some at different frequencies, and that has the effect of the body not getting used to one particular frequency. And even within a frequency treatment, when you have the ability to change cycles, as some protocols where you can change cycles, you'll get different lights operating at different intervals. That can have also potentiating effects on healing the body.
So when you do infrared on a patient that comes in with gout, typically, are you going to use a specific protocol? Are you going to do a mixed frequency, or are you going to, because I know some red light therapies have multiple frequencies. Are you just going to, can you give me more specifics on maybe what someone could do at home related to the red light?
Right. I would make sure that they just look at it as a bona fide infrared unit that has, looking at the reviews and making sure that the company is not just giving you something that is they're purporting to be at a certain standard. And I think that would be the best way to vet that out. As an example, this one does not have, the one that I have and that I'm using in conjunction with another modality, does not have multiple frequencies associated with. This will put out one frequency. What we can do is we can adapt, the time on this one. And I'm all about trying to do mixed modalities of energy so that, you're having the body get different effects that can work in tandem and in synergy.
Totally. So if let's say someone has gout and they apply this therapy to their toe, how long would an average treatment would be? Like 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 15 minutes? What would you do?
I think if you're applying the home-based units, you want to go about 20 minutes at a minimum. And it would even be good to do that at a twice a day interval. So you could do it morning and night. And as you know, the nadir points of the metabolism, typically in, early in the morning and later in the night, as our body is kind of coming to a more a lower relaxed phase, those are the points where these attacks generally are more prevalent. The blood flow isn't as vigorous, et cetera. So those are good timing points that you could apply the therapies. And, it also happens to coincide with the work schedule for most people.
Totally. And then tell us a little bit about, excuse me, what kind of results? Does it happen right away? Does it take some time, multiple treatments, a week or so, or 2 weeks? What's your thought on that?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because you need to be doing, especially with a gout flare, some of the things that you mentioned on your videos to affect the uric acid production and excretion in tandem with. I would not want somebody to think that this is a standalone. This is part of a puzzle, and this is one piece of the puzzle where we're using energy in complement with other things that we're doing with diet modification, obviously clearing out with hydration so that the body can resolve the gouty attack. Now, for longer term maintenance, that's something where you might have to just cut down to like a once a day maintenance treatment as opposed to doing 2 treatments a day.
As you know, one of the big culprits to gout is this fructose, right? And so many people don't connect how much fructose they actually consume, and they think, oh yeah, I'm eating natural fruits. Well, that has some fructose in it, and so does normal table sugar has fructose. From a evolutionary standpoint, we didn't consume nearly the amount of fructose that we do now, and fructose really turns into uric acid at a pretty high rate. But even the evolution of just fruits, right, in general, if you take a look at where certain fruits came from, the amount of sweetness was like way, way, way lower. We've hybrided these fruits to the point where we're just like flooding the body with so much fructose. So that's one of the things that I found. If someone just cuts that out, huge, huge changes in the intensity of the gout. So we definitely need to take in consideration the diet part and certain things that really spike it. And even if you're on the ketogenic diet, xylitol apparently can increase what's called pseudogout, which could be oxalates and things like that can irritate that toe. So, I'm on keto diet. I'm not eating any fructose. I'm not eating any sugar, but you're doing tons of xylitol. That can be like a hidden thing. But that's why I wanted to bring you on, because there's 2 things that I want to talk about, which is infrared and then also electromagnetic type therapy too. You use that. Can you just touch on that therapy as well? Because that can also be something that like a home therapy as well.
Yeah. So I'm going to show you first a larger base unit that I have here. And I like this so much, Dr. Berg, that I have one of these units at home. What it basically is a copper wiring that produces a magnetic field, and it's electro-charged. And unlike, you remember the craze with magnets in your shoes, they just weren't high enough Gauss to affect the bigger changes that we would be looking for cellular exchange.
What is the word Gauss? What is that? Is that just a level of magnetic energy, or what is Gauss?
So Gauss is the power, the electric power charge. So for instance, some of the mats that are widely available now, and I won't get into names and advertising, but they're widely available. They've been sort of the rage for health and wellness. They'll have something like 0.6 Gauss.
Okay.
And those are great for health and wellness. This particular unit goes up to 4,000 Gauss. Now you don't.
1,000.
Yeah, yeah. So you have to be making sure, for instance, that if I had this near my chest, that I don't have a pacemaker, because it would interrupt. It would interrupt the signal on my cell phone if I put this right up to it. And you'll see the, the jagged lines, etc. So this is a larger thing. These are closed loops, so they are purported to be safer than what's emitting from the cell phone in terms of the energy. And that's, I think, a relevant point. As with anything, you have to do your due diligence if you're looking for a home unit. And there are sites that review some of the home units that for several $100s as opposed to several $1,000s, you can find what it is a smaller ring unit. So instead of, being housed in a big plastic, it might just have a smaller loop about the size of a quarter or a $50. And it's a very flexible copper wire ring. And there might be a couple of these that you place on the, let's say if it was gout on your big toe, for instance. And then the box, the power charge unit will be a much smaller, it'll be, probably about the size, a little bit like half a loaf of bread kind of energy unit, as opposed to a much larger microwave size unit. I like the ones that generate more in the, let's say, several hundred Gauss than the ones that are 0.6 Gauss. Not that there's anything wrong, even at those lower levels, they've been shown upregulation of bone production, even at 0.6 Gauss, because the frequency or the hertz is also important. That's the other key to the puzzle. So the more sophisticated the unit, the more options on frequency. My unit, for instance, goes up to 7 to 60 hertz on the frequency. And some of the smaller units, they just won't have as many options on the frequency cycles.
So on a gout situation, what kind of frequency or hertz would you use?
I go all the way up, sometimes as high as the 60%, which is about 2,500 Gauss. And I would do the frequency cycle going from about 7 to about 28 hertz. And what it does is it will go through an oscillation of that particular frequency for, let's say, 2 minutes, and then jump to the next frequency and so on, and then just go in a loop.
And I think you mentioned when we talked before that you can actually see some difference in swelling just by one treatment, right? And swelling comes down,
Right.
the intensity comes down.
In some cases, I've been able to measure the circumference of the body part, and it'll decrease, let's say, in the ankle, 3/4 of a centimeter. And I do these measurements, and I've done them on some of my videos to just document different cases so that people have an idea of the range of things to expect, because every patient responds a little bit differently, as you know.
That's great. So, okay, so electromagnetic fields, and then also, which I've talked about the dangers, but if it's controlled like that in a ring, I think it's going to be a lot better. Have you ever heard of using like methylene blue with the light to potentiate the effect?
I like that idea because of the color spectrum. So it's something that I'll have to research. So this stuff is all related. I mean, it comes down to as elemental as like thinking about photosynthesis and how light affects plant energy production. It's the same basic core idea with a different application. So anything color related is going to have some effect on energy.
Yeah, it's some fascinating new data, and even they're doing it right now, research on cancer, where they're taking the methylene blue, which is kind of like has some really interesting properties to your mitochondria, and then throwing in photo, because the infrared can penetrate the body. So it penetrates in the body and it potentiates the treatment in the mitochondria, and it works on that electron chain, which is kind of just like the conveyor belt of electrons. And so since most problems are mitochondria related, then you're going right at the heart of this thing. So that's something that'll be interesting to experiment on, just adding methylene blue, because methylene blue tends to go where you need it, and it has some fascinating effects of mopping up electrons if you have a leaky mitochondria. And of course, in the big toe, what I would be interested in is, we'll just have to experiment on that, but take methylene blue, do these other therapies, and see what creates the biggest effect. But because we're trying to deal with, at the bottom level, the cell. We're trying to improve the cell function, right? We're trying to get rid of stuff. We're trying to make sure electrons aren't creating so many free radicals, and so
This goes,
yeah.
This goes hand in hand with that in terms of ion exchange. Our cells basically are sodium potassium pumps. So people think back to chemistry, physiology. Oh, I remember something about sodium and potassium with the nerve and vaguely about the cell. But every cell, whether it be a bone cell, smooth muscle cell, has sodium potassium exchange. So our bodies are basically like batteries that respond to energy. And what you mentioned with color, if we can, just like our car, a dark upholstery, and we're absorbing more light. So there's definitely implications there. And I'll be curious to see, once I do the literature search, how that might be able to be incorporated into protocols.
Yeah. So I've been doing some videos recently on, looking at oxygen and CO2, looking at different pHs inside and outside the cell. How can you, because in order to have a battery, to have this energy built up in the cell, then to keep it normal, you need these gradients, these differences, these two different, either two different electrolytes, two different pHs, two different gradients of concentration. So you create this flow. And when we're dealing with crystals building up, waste building up, lactic acid building up, there seems to be some damage in the membrane. So I think the wave of the future is going to be going away from drugs and more to these natural things. So, but it's brand new. It's like people are just now starting to look at it, but there's not going to be a lot probably of research, because there's not a lot of money in doing some of these simple things, unfortunately, especially with methylene blue, because you can't patent it anymore. It's like, it's one of the first drugs, but it seems to do some wonders on restoring the oxygen into the mitochondria, mopping up the excess electrons, so you can then heal the mitochondria. So yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there.
To your point about research too, I was speaking with a company that is doing an IRB on cellular healing for wound healing for like diabetics with electromagnetic in particular.
So you IRB, like infrared, or
for an investigational review board where they're submitting to the NIH. And just so people understand, well, why isn't there more research on this? Well, to do an IRB, first you have to have funding. You have to have an application to the government, several $1,000s. So you really have to believe in your product to even start that. The second layer is, with the pandemic, things have gotten pushed to the back seat. So if there's a cancer research grant, that is going to be at probably a higher priority, even though you would think, oh my gosh, diabetic ulcers, it's a pandemic of diabetes in our Tale of Two Cities nation with, obesity and so forth. But nonetheless, those are very slow to get to the review board to even take action to start the study. So that's why, even on things like you said, where there's not as much money, even on when you have a company backing we'd like to move this science forward, it is just glacial speed sometimes.
I know. It's crazy. But anyway, I really appreciate your time. I know you have a patient sitting there, but listen, I'm going to put your website link down below in the description so people can get a hold of you for maybe other related issues as well that they might have. But thank you, Doc, for spending the time, and I appreciate it. And we'll follow up with some additional information in the future.
I really enjoyed the interview, Dr. Berg. Thanks so much for having me on your program. I continue to learn from you. I love the idea of collaboration and exchange of ideas. And I'm telling you, folks, Dr. McCoy's little thing with that he was doing in the old Star Treks, that is a reality now. We just, as you mentioned, we want to dial in on the protocols so that we have as much science backing. Each study that we do, each patient, though, becomes a part of the discussion where you have anecdotal to build up the body of knowledge.
Awesome. Great. Thanks much.